time for Morning Cup of Joe with Metro Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Good morning, Sheriff. It's great to see you.
Great to see you, Alex.
You know, we want to start with a really horrible story. 2 mass shootings the past week. 8 people killed in Atlanta, 10 in Boulder. As we know, as you know, Las Vegas has already suffered the tragedy of a mass shooting. Sheriff, can you talk a little bit about how Metro prepares for those types of events?
Well, I think it's an ongoing preparedness. You can't, like 1 October, I've said it publicly, it's like a one-off type event. And it's hard to what if every scenario that has a possibility out there, especially in police work. So what we do is try to train for any possible scenario. So the response is similar depending on the size of the actual event. But it's a constant battle for us. Ever since 9/11, we've implemented some form or fashion of training to address mass events such as what occurred. So we have the ability to scale up and scale down depending on the size of the events, but it's an annual training. So in years past in police work, if some significant event occurred and it was a very rare event, we'd train for that, and then everybody would forget about it, and then it's a cluster when it occurs again. So now in these situations, it's an annual training to ensure officers up to speed on what takes place.
Sheriff, does a mass shooting in another city prompt any sort of reaction and response here from Metro?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not even just any mass shooting. It's any terrorist type event that takes place, even if it's in the European sector or in the Asian sector. We still have some sort of response, because what we learned from those type of crimes are there's copycats, or there's people that are motivated by what somebody else does. And so we motivate our troops, we make them aware through the intelligence sources, and then we respond to the specific areas that we have concerns with, or some areas that we may be receiving threats for. So an example would be when we had the theater shootings in Colorado, we did a constant omnipresence within those facilities for quite some time. And similar to what occurred with the Asian community here recently, we've had an increase of omnipresence of officers, so the community feels comfortable that the police department is paying attention.
Absolutely. It's been a full year now, if you can believe it, of the pandemic. Are there any new policies within Metro?
Well, yeah, as you can imagine, we were learning along the way too. So in the original throes of the COVID, it was basically voluntary for the PPE, and then subsequently, as we saw the positivity rate increase, we made it mandatory for the officers to wear gloves and masks and social distancing and washing of the hands and everything else that goes along with the pandemic. But then we had to adjust how we communicated with the public in our public outreach and those kind of forums. What we do as a police agency with that community, building community trust. It's important that we meet with them on a regular basis. So that made it very difficult in the Skype and Zoom and Microsoft Teams world. And then, but internally, we had to make some significant cuts associated with it because of the budget. So we had to get rid of some standing units that we've had on the department for quite some time, such as the Horse Patrol. We've had hiring freezes across the board. We got rid of all our part-time employees to the tune of 140 plus individuals, and we stopped hiring, or we had to scale back on the academies from 6 to 3, so we were just hiring for attrition. So that was a big hindrance for us. In reference to COVID time period. And now, as you can imagine, we're going to try and come out of this moving forward, but it's going to take a long time for us as a police department to recover, because I can't count a police officer for almost 18 months. So now we spool up our hiring apparatus, we hire a police officer, and then it's 18 months from today, if we hired them today, to count them as a police officer. So that's what's the big hurdle associated with law enforcement.
A lot of challenges.
And Alex,
quickly,
just to build off that a little bit, I'm sorry to cut you off, but then the George Floyd protests, we had to make some adjustments during that time period, and then subsequently what was occurring out on the Las Vegas Boulevard, specifically the Strip and Fremont Street, with the violent crime.
Yeah, it's been such a challenging year. Really quickly, Sheriff, we wanted to ask you, we've seen reports of increased cases of COVID-19 at detention centers. Is there an effort to get the COVID vaccine to inmates or corrections officers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was a push early on. It isn't because of what's occurring now, but that was a push early on because of our concern being in a confined space, especially the corrections officers are working within a confined space and the ability to social distance. So we had to actually shut down some modules, decrease our inmate population by various means to make adjustments for that social distancing concern. But in today's number, we're doing very well. We're less than 2% positive inmates. And now with the Johnson & Johnson coming on board, it's a lot easier for us to offer a vaccine because an inmate, an average stay in a CCDC is right around 18 days right now, so it'd be very difficult to apply a two-stage vaccine. So, and it's also very beneficial for our police officers. They can receive a vaccine as they come into the CCDC, upon arresting an individual. They can also receive the vaccine if they haven't had it. So it's going to be twofold. So with the proliferation of Johnson & Johnson, it's going to make it a little bit easier in that space.
Yeah, and in general as well. Sheriff Lombardo, it is wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Good to see you, Alex.
Thank you. And if you have a question for the sheriff, you can send it to us on our website, 8newsnow.com. Find out if your question was answered every Wednesday.